There are many different ways to invest in real estate, from funds to syndication deals to REITs, but if you want to buy an individual property, today I'm going to share with you Asia's 5 best markets for property. This list of the 5 best real estate markets in Asia come to us from our friends at investasian.com. These are their opinions and they make a lot of good points. This list is largely focused at someone who wants to buy an individual property, or maybe a couple of individual properties, condos, or even in the case of a country like Malaysia or South Korea, you can buy a home with land. Not a lot of opportunities to do that in Asia, but we're going to talk about this list of 5 countries today. If it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consultancy that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes, diversify and protect their assets, and increase their freedom and options with second passports, with international investments. I'm also the host of the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live, which is open to all. And InvestAsian gives a great example of Thailand, for example, Bangkok, where the founder happens to live, and has said Bangkok is perhaps a little bit overpriced. But if you were to buy in Bangkok 10 years ago, in the center, your asset would have doubled in value, or potentially even better. If you would have invested just down the coast, or just next door in Pattaya, a 2-hour drive away, you are facing now a buyer's market due to oversupply issues and weak tourist numbers. Oversupply is an issue in some Asian markets, and obviously tourism has been an issue in the last couple of years, especially in Asia, which has been the slowest part of the world to reopen. He says your asset wouldn't have appreciated much or at all. Now, I think the thing that you want to look at when you're buying property overseas, people try and put too many objectives together. I'm going to buy it, I'm going to live in it, I'm going to rent it out, I'm going to get a loan against it. It's a lot harder to get debt on properties overseas, potentially from a developer. It's a lot easier if you've got a job there, have a local business, which you probably wouldn't be doing if you're following the Nomad Capitalist plan. But if you are buying something to live in, I would focus on buying something you want to live in, and making it something where you have diversification perhaps into a foreign currency, which many of these Asian markets offer, which they offer at a discount right now, as Asian currencies against the US dollar are substantially weaker than they were a year ago. I would make it an asset protection play, and I would make it a lifestyle play. Possibly you get a residence or citizenship. In the case of Asia, you get a residence permit out of it. So if lifestyle is your goal, focus on lifestyle and let the gains that come in be secondary. If your goal is investment, you want to rent these things out, then that's a different metric. So you always want to understand that. That being all said, there are options if you do invest in Asia to get residence permits. You can then open up bank accounts. There are a number of different good opportunities to put your money into Asian countries. Some of the strongest banks in the world are in Asia. That being said, these are in no particular order. He does list number 5, Bangkok is one of the world's most visited cities, and says that in a normal year, its annual tourist arrivals outrank London and even Paris. 35 million people a year will visit the Land of Smiles. Now, I happen to not really feel the vibe of Bangkok, maybe in the minority. You should go where you like, and certainly people who've invested in Bangkok have done very well in the last 10 years, to where prices perhaps are a little toppy right now. What he does say, this from InvestAsian, is that surging Chinese tourist arrivals occurred at roughly the same time as rising condo prices and transaction volume in central Bangkok. One thing you should know, if you're sitting in the US, in Canada, somewhere in the Western world, and you're looking at property in Asia, you've got to understand the influence from the Chinese, to a lesser extent perhaps the Koreans, the Japanese. People are bringing money into the country. In some of these markets, you had money from Russians coming in, but really, China was the big one that was driving this. That could be good or bad, but that has driven a lot of these prices up. And people have argued, foreigners have argued about the fundamentals of the Chinese market for years, and have often been wrong. Whether they continue to be wrong is anyone's guess. But the idea that the Chinese real estate market was going to collapse, people have been saying that for a long time, and those people have just continued to go and buy properties all over the region. The Thai baht is also kind of seen, I think, among some people in Asia as kind of a secondary safe haven currency. It has been down against the US dollar recently, as have been all the Asian currencies and a lot of foreign currencies in general. But Thai banks, the Thai baht, have been seen secondarily to Singapore as kind of as a safe haven. You have gold vaults there, for example, in Bangkok. People store their gold there. So it is kind of a secondary haven for a lot of folks in Asia. And that currency has stood up better than, for example, the Japanese yen or even the Singapore dollar in some comparisons. So the next market, best markets to invest in Asia for individual property, is Kuala Lumpur, where I happen to own a property. Malaysia being perhaps Southeast Asia's most open and competitively priced market. Foreigners can own land. So if you want to go and buy land, build a house, happen to know someone doing that. If you want to own the land underneath an existing house, you can do that. If you want to buy a condo, you can own freehold. I mean, there's mostly freehold property. And so you can buy at much lower prices than you can in Bangkok. In my case, about $1,500 a meter for city center property. If you are Australian, a lot of folks like to go up to Penang and be close to the water. You can look at both cities, KL, Penang. Penang's gotten beaten up more. You do certainly have a supply issue in Malaysia that perhaps you don't have in some of these other markets, which is why it can be as little as a third to a quarter the price per square meter. What you also have, speaking to the lifestyle aspect, and what I've kind of liked about it is much larger properties where if you buy something just a few years older, you are going to find property that is so big that just the market to sell it at $5,000 a meter, $6,000, $7,000 a meter that you might see in many central markets in Bangkok or the Philippines where you have more Chinese interest. You're not going to see a 4,000 square foot property go for $2 million in Malaysia because it is going to be less liquid. So you can buy properties for $500,000 and have a huge space. And then pair that with, let's say, the My Second Home Residence program. So I think Malaysia, what I've said, is more of a residence option. If you get in, the ringgit, the currency kind of tends to ebb and flow. If you can get in kind of the mid fours to the dollar, you can potentially have some currency appreciation. I think in the long term, there can be some appreciation on your property, but perhaps for the short term, more of a lifestyle play. Now, the next market that's recommended as one of the best markets for property in Southeast Asia and Asia in general is Phnom Penh, Cambodia. We've been talking about this with you for almost a decade, and totally different play in my case. Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur versus Phnom Penh. You probably aren't going to want to live in Phnom Penh. It is more adventurous, and by the way, it's not even particularly cheap because everything is dollarized, and so you're paying in dollars. You will probably get around in your day-to-day life more cheaply in Malaysia than you would in Cambodia. And yet Malaysia is at the same level of development as, let's say, the Czech Republic, whereas Cambodia is still a frontier market economy. What does that mean? It means that global banks are still coming in. You've got ICBC, Bank of China. You've got all kinds of big shopping groups. You've got big investment groups, strong urbanization, healthier birth rates. The idea is that the capital city's population will double basically by 2030. And so if you've been to Phnom Penh, I've been going there for years. It certainly is making some advancements, but it is still a frontier market economy. You can still buy under $1,000 per meter in central Phnom Penh. You are generally going to need to work with someone in the market who can own that property for you. If you just go and buy a condo halfway to the airport, you're going to pay $2,500 a meter, for example. That's where a lot of Chinese money is going in. Or, where I was a decade ago, Sihanoukville on the water. Probably too late for that, but I think still have opportunities in Phnom Penh. I think it's the one place to invest for the very reasons that are mentioned in this article, that you want to be in city centers where people are moving. People, and especially in these up-and-coming economies, people are moving into the cities. I don't care if we're talking about Southeast Asia. I don't care if we're talking about the Middle East, North Africa. I don't care if we're talking about Latin America. People are moving to the capitals as their economies grow in search of work. And so I think Phnom Penh at under $1,000 a meter, it's becoming a lot harder to find those deals. And you're generally going to need to work with someone to own those. But you can get those freehold and compare that to, let's say, a Hanoi. You're going to pay 1/4 the price of, let's say, Hanoi, which obviously, I think is a more beautiful city than Ho Chi Minh, is not as developed. Even a Jakarta, not nearly as developed as Kuala Lumpur. By an order of magnitude, in my opinion, you're going to pay a much, much, much higher price than a Cambodia, which has more proximity to Thailand, Vietnam, China, all the growth markets. So very interesting country, from my opinion. I've been saying it for a decade, and I continue to say that, and we'll see how it goes. Next up, Manila. Manila prices have been crazy since first going there over a decade ago. And you've got over 25 million people living in this entire kind of megalopolis metro area. They're suggesting 35 million people by 2050, which would be bigger than Tokyo, which would be bigger than Beijing. And so the Philippines itself, from I think 100 million and change up to about 150 million also by 2050, you're going to have a population boom. Now, obviously, a lot of people are outsourcing there. And so if you're looking at kind of having some kind of wing of your company, wouldn't be the worst thing to have property in Manila. Since I first started going there, I think kind of the heart of Manila has shifted from the Makati area over to Fort Bonifacio, the global city, you're going to pay a lot more than you would in Kuala Lumpur. I think you have, if you look at the global city, Bonifacio global city, I mean, really an impressive area, more expensive than, let's say, a Kuala Lumpur, which I think the country itself offers much higher level of development. But people have spoken. They are investing in Manila, and the growth of that city is just incredible. You cannot own houses or land. You can own condos, freehold. So you are more limited than in a country like Malaysia. But prices have continued to go up. The currency has remained a bit soft. And so there is an opportunity for there, especially if you are, expanding and you need to be hiring people in Asia. It could be an interesting place to go, and you live in a very Singaporeized part of Manila. You can certainly look at other areas of Manila. You can certainly look at other parts of the Philippines. Cebu City is perhaps more livable. Some people like Davao, the more rural part of Mindanao. You've got Iloilo, which is up and coming. So you've got a number of different places, maybe more cities that you would consider in Philippines than you might consider in some of these other countries. Lastly, on InvestAsia's list of the top 5 Asian real estate markets is Seoul. And one of the reasons that he mentions that is South Korea also allows foreigners to come in and own land. It also allows you to get a residence permit and work towards permanent residence in one of the world's most developed countries by investing in property. And so if you're willing to spend a nominal amount of time living in South Korea every year, you can work towards permanent residence, which for a country which has a very strict process of naturalization, doesn't allow dual citizenship in almost all cases, is the closest that you're going to get, but not a bad thing to have in your back pocket necessarily if you buy property. And the Korean won has gone down somewhat considerably for an economy of its stature versus the US dollar in the last year. And so he mentions owning land, he mentions freehold. You're not going to get outsized returns like you might in Manila or even in Bangkok, but you're basically trading, returns for the stability of Korea, which is certainly a much more developed market, much superior to Tokyo, and so those are 5 markets that in Asia should be worth considering. Again, go through that list. The Philippines has options that you can move there. They're not as friendly as they used to be before the pandemic. But these are basically countries where if you have wealth and you're the kind of person who wants to buy real estate, you can get residence. Thailand with the investor visa or the elite visa. Malaysia has the My Second Home program or the programs for people who start companies in Labuan, for example. The Philippines has its programs. The South Korea has its investor program. Asia is a place where if you bring wealth, you can get in. And Cambodia may be the tougher one to get in. Could you get a business visa in Cambodia? Harder than it was, but ostensibly yes. So if you've got wealth and you want to invest in property, they say Asia is the continent of the 21st century. You have investment from within Asia going to these countries, especially a place like Cambodia. And so those are 5 markets that you would want to consider for your property search in Asia.